You're helping let the truth ruin a good story with this Paul the Other One podcast. Hello there, good morning, morena. I hope everyone is having a lovely, relaxing Sunday morning. I'm here to ruin it for you with facts, which seems to be something I do on a fairly regular basis. We're going out live on Instagram today as well, because I wanted to give it a try and see if it worked. But if you're commenting on Instagram, I may not be able to see the comments come through in my call center here. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Today, I'm going to be talking paywalls. And ironically, this episode is brought to you by people who are paid supporters of the content that I make. So I want to thank everybody who does that. If you want to consider becoming a paid supporter, you can do that on the YouTube page. But somebody actually messaged me about this the other day. There are other ways of being able to support that isn't necessarily about just giving up money, because, there is a cost of living crisis going on. The big one is watching stuff with ads. It is a really solid way of being able to make sure that creators get supported across the spectrum, left, right, up, down. So that is always a good thing. Now, there's a couple of little things that I got to get through here as well that I wanted to show you. The first is today's poll. Let me jump onto the right page and get the poll here. Being about paywalls, this is a paywall poll to find out what you would do when you hit a paywall on a major political story or election breakdown. Do you go to social media to look for it? Do you subscribe or go into a free trial from the site for it? Do you hope that it's on other free news sites, or do you ignore it because paywalls suck? To vote on that, you just need to type in 1, 2, 3, or 4 into the comment section, and it will come up nice and easy. We'll do the vote throughout the day, and we'll check out the results the next hour, and we'll check out the results by the time we get to the end of it. So that is super easy. That's the first one. Well, I drink my own coffee here. The second thing I would like to show you guys, if you get a chance at some point, and if you subscribe to the Substack email newsletter that I do, you might already have an email in your inbox that's just gone out. It's just gone live to everybody. But this is, I think, one of the most important Substacks I've written in a very long time. On Tuesday, I went to Tamaki, to Mission Bay, a bit further north, St. Heliers, literally in the shadow of the house of the richest man in the country, former house. But this was a meeting with Dame Marilyn Waring and a couple of other people who were involved in the People's Panel process looking at pay equity. And the results of this were really shocking. As in, there was a dedicated conspiracy there to make sure that people This is a really good question. Do you get a breakdown of ad revenue versus premium view ads? I might do. I don't think I've ever looked it up, but I will hunt that down and let you know, Gold. I'll flick you an email with an answer on that one, because I'd be very curious to know myself, actually. But yeah, on Tuesday, I went and listened to Dame Marilyn Waring talk about pay equity and what the People's Panel found, which was a dedicated conspiracy known as Project 10 to hide changes or plans for changes from the wider public, so they didn't get panicked. People going, oh my God, we have to put in our application now. And we're going to touch on it a little bit today on some of the stuff that's been put out since then around how much it's actually going to cost and all of that kind of stuff, because there was some paywalled content around it earlier this week. So we will dive into that. Absolutely, if you get a chance, go and have a read of it, because it's so important that people are aware of just what this government did to hide that, to the point where 5 days before they made the announcement, Shane Retty was still meeting with unions for healthcare workers, pretending like everything was fine, knowing full well what was going to happen. So yeah, definitely go give that a read. Scan the QR code if you can. And I'll pop that up a little bit later as well, so that everybody's got it sorted. And yeah, we'll do the poll as we go around what you do when you hit a paywall. So far, we've got a clear early winner. Hope it's free on other news sites, which makes sense. And I have to admit, when it comes to paywalls, the thing that annoys me the most about the Herald is it's owned by a billionaire Canadian. And I know he's got to make money, and I'll get into that shortly, but he can afford to just make it free, but doesn't. But that's a me thing. Right, so hide that one. And remember, the poll is still going throughout the whole thing, but if you're watching this on something like Instagram, then you can't see my face. I look like I'm sort of peeking over the top and just going, oh, wow, what's the sneaky thing here? All right, so I'll go hide that. Pressy, lots of buttons. Plenty of buttons. Oh, yeah. Also, don't forget, in terms of supporting things that you can do that are really simple is liking and sharing a video because it pushes it out to people on the algorithm. Little tricks, little things like that. Let's take a look at paywall journalism. Um, so I decided to call it pay up because why not? Why wouldn't I? And as usual, there are going to be questions buried in here for you guys that I'm really keen to get your answers on, but feel free to throw me questions in the comments section as well. I have a feed here. I have a feed over there for Instagram, and all sorts. This is weird. And if it works on Instagram, I might try it on TikTok if I can get it to work there. We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, let's have a look at paywall journalism. So this is the unfortunate reality of paywall journalism. We kind of have it because we have to. Journalism costs money to produce, is what it pretty much boils down to. Um, no, no, Blake, she didn't mention that at all. So she was not a fan. She was very diplomatic. But there was a great question that came up from, I think it was Karanina, who asked, why don't you, if you've got a senior citizen, like a senior citizen in your life who lives in a care facility, ask them why they would vote right, knowing full well that they're hurting the people that look after them. So that was something that stuck with me. But you can read about that on the Substack, on the newsletter. All right, so yeah, journalism costs money to produce. You've got to pay for things like websites and journalists, like their actual costs, their bills. It costs to run around and to do research and do all of that kind of stuff. And we don't have the same advertising models that we saw 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the news was kind of cornered in how it was produced. So if news was being presented, it was going to be handed to you in the form of a physical newspaper, or you were going to sit down and listen to it on a radio, or you were going to sit down and watch it on TV at specific dedicated points in time to keep informed. So those are captured markets essentially, which means that you really want to make sure that everybody is paying to basically be seen on it. It's why the news was the biggest, most watched shows out there. But we've shifted away from those communication models. We don't have that centralized communication delivery anymore. But news is still really, really important to keep people informed. So our advertising model shifts have moved into this paywall thing. And for years, there have been discussions and conversations around the best way to make sure that you can continue to pay for journalism, because journalism has in the past done some really important things, like Watergate, for example. That was journalism that brought down a president. That kind of importance needs to be funded because it can't be done for free. But the models that we have now don't necessarily work for everyone, and they've actually shifted the way that not only do we access media, but the way that media itself is produced and who media is produced for. So let's go to the next slide. Paywalls are at their very core something that we call economic gatekeeping. Basically, anything that is blocking or choosing who it is that gets to access content is known as gatekeeping. And this one is all down to money. It's all down to who is willing to pay, usually, yeah. I'm not going to go into dodgy stuff, but yeah, it is one of those things that, generally speaking, you're filtered by how much you're willing to pay. All right, so that's why price here is the primary filter. Traditional gatekeeping in news filtered it based on what you'd call editorial merit. Basically, an editor decides that it's really important that you know this. It's really important that you read this headline. It's really important that this is the story that leads the 6 o'clock news. But now, because it's a financial gatekeeping measure, that decision is based on what news is important enough that you want to pay for. All right. And so this actually creates this kind of void where facts get locked in behind paywalls. And you might want to see some facts to help you decide how you're going to vote, for example, or which politicians you're going to believe, or you know, which rugby team you want to support, for example. It is what have we got here? Harmley Solutions says paywalling is particularly frustrating and potentially dangerous in regards to civil emergency events. Looking at you, post, yeah, that's a really big one. It's actually one of the reasons why the government consistently, like RNZ, for example, is paid for by the government specifically for emergency broadcast. If there's a cyclone or an earthquake or something like that, they need the infrastructure to be able to tell people what to do. And so when you see threats from MPs about, oh, we're going to cut your funding to Radio New Zealand in particular, that's more than just a we don't like what you're saying. That's a we're going to put people in physical danger if there's an emergency because we're ideologically opposed to what it is that we're being asked. It is really dangerous. All right. So yeah, in-depth background checks and investigative reporting get hidden behind subscription rules, which limits what people get to know. And we actually saw a lot of that last year with the local body elections. And then outlets align editorial focus with an interest of affluent subscribers rather than the general voting public. So what you'll see, particularly on sites like the Herald, is that the content that they're making for Paywall is designed really specifically for people who can afford the paywall. So if you have a look at the economics section, for example, a lot of that stuff is paywalled because it's very pro-business. So they know the people that want to use it or want to access it are more likely to have the money than people who don't have the money. So it is very specifically designed that way. And our news evolves. The way that news is presented has evolved. The way that editorial choices around what gets paywalled have also evolved because of it. All right, so first question for you. Have you ever come across an example of media coverage in an election that was paywalled so people didn't see something that you felt that they should? Great comment here from Earthling Steve. Facts do care about your finances. Depending on the outlet, yes, they do. So yeah, first question for you. Have you ever come across media coverage in an election that was paywalled so people didn't see something that you felt they should? This is actually based on a number of real world examples from last year. During the local body elections, there was a group of researchers who were really adamant that we needed to know about disinformation aligned candidates, people that were running under Voices for Freedom, tutelage, that kind of stuff. They created a couple of different groups to train themselves up, to get skilled, to share details and information on, little things like don't go and post all of your leaflets on the same day in the same electorate, otherwise people might think you're connected. Ways to manipulate voters. And we tried for months to get media coverage on this. And we finally got something out of, I think it was the Post or the Press, the Christchurch one. Andrea Vance and Charlie Mitchell wrote a piece up after voting had already started because it was a postal ballot, which meant that the work had already been, and that's not Charlie and Andrea's fault. That was an editorial choice and just how long they waited until it came out. And even then it was paywalled. So you had all of this information that was detailing a range of political candidates from all over the country, including people like Hope Spooner, who you might have seen in the news over the last week for her benefit fraud. People like Elizabeth Munt, who's running as the New Zealand First candidate for Selwyn. She's a climate change denier, conspiracy theory pusher on things like chemtrails are real and Three Waters means that Maori are coming to steal all your water kind of stuff. All of it was paywalled. They looked into the detailed issues around South Island, in particular, the democratic processes that had been influenced by community groups, like your citizens and ratepayers groups and concerned ratepayer groups that were all set up or taken over by these conspiracy pushers to give themselves a sense of authority when it comes to dealing with the public. That's my example on this one. And so for me, it's a really big topic. I'm just like, so frustrating. Because if that had come out earlier and it was free, it might have changed some of the outcomes that we saw. But, well, it isn't. So yeah, I'd love to hear your examples. Pop them in the comments section. And this is, see, I'm getting used to this. This is also a good time for me to remind you as well to check out the latest newsletter, the Project 10 newsletter, learn a little bit more about how pay equity changes which sent to hide us or hidden from us. And let's pop this one up. Don't forget to run in this poll as well. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the comments section. What do you do when you hit a paywall on a major political story or election breakdown? Do you do a social media search for it? Do you subscribe or free trial it? Do you hope that it's on other free news sites, or do you ignore it because, paywalls suck? 1, 2, 3, 4 comment section. Go. All right, let's jump on to the next one. Right, so this is the next few slides are a little bit of an example as to what our landscape's like. So we're going to go through 3 different types of outlet here and how the paywalls work. The first one is the Herald, which I suspect is the most famous, like it's the most well known for paywalling content. And what it's done is it's launched a digital subscriptions services locking in political gallery analysis, investigative pieces, and election policy breakdowns behind their paywall. So almost all of their political coverage ends up behind a paywall, but they do pick and choose a little bit. So the paywall content is usually critical of the coalition, but the stuff that they open up tends to be criticism of the current opposition. So it makes the opposition look bad, and it means that the public don't necessarily know what's bad happening in the coalition. So let's have a look at some examples. This is one that came through recently over the last couple of days. Union cost pay equity change at 6 billion. Treasury warns figure misleading. And this is actually in that that newsletter as well, the Treasury report for pay equity. So what actually happened was, and this is a quote from within the story, estimates of gross and net impact should be considered in the context of wider budget 2025 package, a Treasury spokesperson said. There are some experts like Clint Smith, for example, who, master of communication, worked with the Labour under Jacinda, really onto it with this kind of information and data, who said, yeah, no, look, the Treasury has said the cost that we're looking at is around 6 billion. So it is quite substantive. And that's because if you look at how, it might go, 12.8 billion on paper, but the number of people who get pay increases then mean that people are paying more in taxes. People are paying more in KiwiSaver, which goes onto government books as savings. It means that people who are reliant on things like an accommodation supplement or working for families' tax credit, because they're in a higher earning bracket, the amount that they get goes down. So you end up with these checks and balances that even themselves out. So the 12.8 billion, as Marilyn said, the way that they seem to have worked it out was basically gone, there is almost 200,000 people who are impacted by these claims. This is how much their salaries are over 10 years plus 30%. And that's how they came to that number. There wasn't any of this, well, how does this impact KiwiSaver? How does this impact tax take and stuff like that? So it becomes really, it's complicated, but misleading. And that's what this is about. They're saying that, maybe those Treasury numbers aren't right. What Treasury actually turned around and said afterwards was maybe we could have cleared up how we commented on this a little bit more. So it was, not great. Not great. Saw a question pop in here. This one here, system change or climate change. Why can't they rely on advertising income rather than paywalls? It's not there anymore, is pretty much what it boils down to. The amount of money that they got from advertising, the majority of it, especially for newspapers, came from small ads, your classified, your job ads, stuff like that. And those have all been moved now to places like Trade Me or Seek. If you're looking at job ads, Facebook Marketplace, for example. So if you compare, if you're old as I am, and you remember the days back when Saturday newspapers were an inch thick, as a paperboy, they were not fun. But those were job ads, those were classifieds, and that's where the majority of advertising came from. And then they charged a lot more for, down top, bottom, front page, bottom right-hand corner, for example, where your hand goes when you move the paper. So that kind of thing is where the advertising was. It's just not there anymore. So they can still charge for ads. They still make a little bit of money off things like Google ads, but the advertising volume just isn't there. So to be able to continue doing what they're doing, they simply have to put in a paywall apparently for it, because ads don't work the same way that they did. It's one of the reasons why funding public media is really important. I'll get into that again as well. But yeah, funding public media is a way of making sure that ads don't get in the way. Because if you ever look at something like Stuff, there's a whole bunch of native advertising in there, which can be good. Like it can certainly do the trick if it's done well and it aligns with the brand. But the way that Stuff does it does not align with the brand, not at all. So there's the answer to that one. All right. So yeah, this was the Herald. Pay equity was a big one. And then there was this one as well. Is Jordan Williams New Zealand's best union boss? And again, this was set up so that after the paywall, there's an admission in there that the Free Speech Union and the Taxpayers Union are not real unions. It is a right-wing mouthpiece and doesn't help people who might bicker with they don't help people. There should have been a comma in there. They also bicker with National, but they are almost completely blind to how they deal with ACT. Yes, Elspeth paywalls can be used as a form of censorship. Absolutely. One that you pay for. Yeah. Um, so I've often wondered, this one from Gold, often wondered if commentator funded model would work. Free access, but if you want to participate in the discussion, you pay 5 to 10% cents per comment. Hopefully, more considered comments, fewer trolls. I would love something like that on Facebook, actually. That would be amazing. Be so good. So yeah, the paywall. Like, this was actually a really fascinating article because there's this whole big admission that it's not a real union, that they are a mouthpiece for ACT, and that's what he claims makes them a good union, or makes Williams a good union boss, because he then flips over and goes, PSA, CTU, they're proper unions, but bad because they're so blinded by how much they want to help their members, just like Jordan does with the people he supports. And it was a really fascinating kind of flip to sit and watch because, this is a puff piece saying, Jordan Williams is a bit of a dick, but he's a dick for the party he loves, and we should support that. It was, yeah, it was a really fascinating one. But again, behind a paywall, and it's clearly a rage bait title based on some of the comments that I've seen coming through here. So it's really kind of fascinating to see how they did that. All right. The next one that we're going to look at is Stuff regional titles. A couple of years back, Stuff decided that their main page, which is still the most visited news site in the country, I believe, was going to remain free mostly, but content from their regional titles was going to be moved behind a paywall. So that's the Post, the Press, and the Waikato Times. And what that does is it actually really limits local content. So suddenly you have people who can't necessarily access what's going on in their own communities or with their own local councils. Don't worry, Olby, there is plenty that you can catch up on. It's fine. I will do updates in a second, so you can see what it is that you missed. Super easy. So this is a really interesting one for the local stuff, because this is where we've seen so many local media outlets close, and the big local regional outlets are really cool as well. But what we need is for them to be free to everybody. And for that to happen, you need the advertisers to pay. So, But what ends up happening here is you end up with limited political coverage from places like Wellington, our most political city in the country. And investigative local journalism looking at local governance and local issues also ends up behind a paywall, which is really problematic. So here are some examples from Stuff. We have councillors decide to retain STV for next election after all, and hold referendum on change. So you may recall Hamilton City Council decided to surprise everybody and switch to first past the post for the next local body election. And that was pretty much what they were going to do. There was a bit of an outcry because they've been using STV for the last 2 local elections. So to change it without consultation, to make that decision without consultation, pissed a lot of people off. Sue Moroney, who's a current city councillor, former MP, she was actually the MP who pushed for extending paid parental leave. That National's like, no, we're not going to do that. It costs too much. Financial veto, even though everybody in Parliament says they want it. She put forward a motion, putting it onto an extraordinary council meeting that was this week. And so they voted on, and council has changed their decision. So they'll continue with STV for this election, for the next one that comes up. So people rank their candidates, and there will be a referendum at the same time to see which electoral system voters want, which is how it should have been the whole time. But what this doesn't tell you, because it's behind a paywall, is that this passed with a majority, and 3 councillors chose to vote against it, that wanted to retain first past the post. 2 of them are ACT members and 1 is a conspiracy theorist, but they don't put that on here. So you don't get to see that above the paywall at all. So voters, when it comes to the next election, as angry as they might be about these changes being pushed through without consultation initially, they don't get told specifically who it is that supported that change to continue. So that's a real concern at a local level. So I've got all these comments coming through. For those of you that are watching this on Instagram, I don't have your comments come through directly in front of me, so they're sort of all over the place. Typically, the people in my workplace are current government, so there will be decent chance I disagree. That's fair. That is very fair. Right. Another one with stuff regional titles. Major legislation that will have a huge impact on the economy. And this is talking about the RMA changes that are coming through, because nobody is denying there needs to be RMA changes. Labor was actually working on it before the last election. They had a great big replacement policy set lined up. National came and went, no, we're not going to do that. You want to talk to Māori and look after the environment. What a stupid thing to do. So Labor has turned around and said, when the election comes through, they get back in. They're going to be making some changes to the reforms that the coalition have put forward. Not changing it completely, not swapping it all out completely, but they want to make sure that there's a focus on environmentalism and Te Tiriti partnership. But that's not something that you see in this particular story. That is because it is below the paywall line here. So you're looking at major legislation that's going to have a huge impact on the economy and the way that we use the land around us, but clear issues with ministerial overreach and Te Tiriti protections. So opposition stances in an election year that are clearly an important consideration for people looking at voting this year are hidden below the paywall here. So it is a real problem when that sort of thing happens. It makes it much harder for you to be able to be kept informed. And like Rachel Brookings actually been out on social this weekend promoting this. She's like, this is an amazing piece. You guys should go read it. It covers us really well, but it's behind a paywall. So how many people get to go and see it? And then we have two other specialist outlets that really specifically use paywalls. One is NBR and one is Newsroom Pro. They employ hard paywalls for deep business and environmental policy reporting, creating specialized information tiers. So this limits the access to deep dive research into areas that the coalition claim to do well on, but data shows otherwise, particularly on NBR, where it's a presentation, it's a publication for business people. It's literally there in the title. It is one of those things that it would be really good to get even-handed information on there, but they know specifically that their market tends to lean right. All right, so here are a couple of examples for you. The one on the left here, battle-scarred opportunity veteran feels like pushing an open door now. This is a pro-opportunity piece that was done in Newsroom Pro, talking about a specific candidate. And the candidate's been running for opportunity since they started. She's fought cancer in that time, and it's talking about the difference from when she first ran to this year's election. And that is a fascinating story. It shows you some real changes in the attitudes of voters and the issues that they consider important and how they feel that opportunity is presenting that to them. Paywalled. Same with NBR, Nationals leadership woes and Labor's opportunity. This is one that talks about opportunity again, but talks about it in a pro-Labor way or pro-left-wing way while criticizing the government. So NBR has put this behind a paywall. And that's, again, really problematic for the same reasons that we've said a million times over. So big Oldie here, public knowledge shouldn't be behind the paywall. Like, I can't afford all the subscriptions in this economy at least. And that's also a really big one, in this sort of economy where, was it the worst that it's been since the 90s? It does make it harder for people to use discretionary funding on things like media. So very, very big thing. I'm not surprised as well that Sam knows Jessica. Sam knows most of the candidates. He is well in tune with these, and he's gearing up for this season of It's in the Ballot for the election. So definitely, if you haven't had a chance yet, go give him a follow. He does some of the most interesting, fun candidate events for the lead up to the election. So please go give him a follow if you haven't done so already, because it is well worth keeping yourself informed. All right, let's jump on to the next slide, which is another question for you. Which is just a really simple one, because when I'm doing this up, I'm like, when was the last time I opened a physical newspaper? I honestly don't know. I couldn't, maybe when I went and visited my parents, I think they still get like a local community paper. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But yeah, I'm really curious. When was the last time you guys opened a physical newspaper? All right, so while you are pondering that and answering the question, I'm going to pop these back up again. The poll that are running at the moment. What do you do when you hit a paywall on a major political story or election breakdown? Do you, 1, do a social media search for it; 2, subscribe or go into a free trial to find it; 3, hope that it's on another free news site; or 4, ignore it because paywalls suck? And to vote in that, you just jump into the comment section, go 1, 2, 3, or 4 for your choice. And also, don't forget, this is available now for free for everybody. This is the story around pay equity. After talking to Dame Marilyn Waring, it's called "Don't Be Lazy" because that is what, like, I literally went up to her and said, doing this story, I'd love a line to finish it on. What's the bit of advice that you would give people to go out and vote for the, like going to vote this year? She goes, don't be lazy. So I'm sorry, spoilers for, I guess, for the written piece. But she's like, yeah, don't be lazy, read the research. That's her advice. You can go and check that out now. It's free for everybody as of 10 o'clock this morning. And there'll be videos and stuff like that for subscribers on that channel as well. So let's have a look at some of the comments we got here. Last weekend at my grandparents' house. Yep, that makes perfect sense. Some people still enjoy getting newspapers. I know that Sam from It's in the Ballot still does paper delivery, so there's clearly a demand for it. This one here from System Change or Climate Change. We know is moving the newspaper pile. That makes sense. Apart from the local one I sometimes get at the supermarket, I don't see physical newspapers. That's a really good point as well. Like they're much harder to find these days. They're not everywhere. They're certainly not as big as they used to be. I don't even know if our local dairy still sells them here, because I know they used to. Yeah. Big Olby here with, at least I can access papers on my Libby app, but I have to go searching a bit. Plus, I need to know that it's for an article I want to read first. And that's something that comes from the evolution of media that we've got. We now know that we can go and find things that we want. It's how we get this such partisan, and we'll go into this as well a little bit later, we get such partisan outlooks in our news. Knowing that there's going to be a story in there is going to be a big driver for it. And it's a very old newspaper adage as well, that, more names means more sales, because people want to see their name in the newspaper. So knowing that the article is something that you're looking for, that's going to be a big part of it. So yeah. So many comments coming through. We occasionally get from Harmless Solutions NZ, Harmless Solutions, not harmless, Harmless Solutions. We occasionally get a rural community paper dropped in our mailbox free and get to do Sudoku. So otherwise, meh. This one here from Blake. I'd already decided before today's episode, but for tomorrow, I'll be taking only bookings that are not behind paywall. And if they agree, then do it anyway. I'll be asking for it to be removed. Yeah, and I know BHN's done the same move. Pat's been looking at the same thing. This one here from Elspeth. I don't even get a community newspaper now. I must admit, I rely on online news sites. It seems that this is skewed as well. Yeah, they can be. A lot of the online news stuff is really interesting because a lot of the people that were working in it or have been working in it started in print, and so they kind of have that same view of it. If you ever look at places like the Waipa, there's a group of publications that are done in the region, like Te Awamutu News, Cambridge News. They also do a business news thing as well, and that's Marianne Gill who set that up, and the people that work on it, they are old school newspaper hard. They love that kind of stuff. And they're finding that their communities weren't serviced, so they jumped in and created this content. And a lot of the stuff that's gone on, I think Crux in the South Island is a former newspaper person as well. So you find a few of them that have pulled from that experience and have gone online. But other places, not necessarily the case. Soft Starlight here. We get a little rural newspaper. I don't read it often. Old newspapers used to be handy for having to wrap up rubbish. When was the last time you saw a newspaper on fish and chips? My sister works in a fish and chip shop, and that was her first comment. You don't use newspaper anymore for fish and chips. Nobody has newspapers for it anymore. Big Olby here with, it's actually been years since I opened a physical paper, but I used to get the local publication for free in my letterbox. However, I put up addressed mail only sticker, and that seems to stop. That's because they have really strict, they had really strict rules and criteria around what counted as junk mail. Anything that you are paying for is not junk mail. Anything that is free for a lot of places is considered junk mail. So there's a blanket, you shouldn't deliver here because they don't want junk mail. BHN behind a paywall this week. Maybe. I hope not. I doubt it. I highly doubt it. That is not Pat's way. But some of the content that they've been involved in over the last couple of weeks has ended up behind paywalls when they've been talking to media, and I know that's something that's incredibly frustrating. This one here from Matthew Mellon. Maybe all the wealthy people will end up accidentally propagandized to the left. The B is great. This comment here from NZ Nemesis. The only time I get physical newspaper is a historical memento for big events, moon landing, disasters, etc. We used to have, completely off the record, off topic here, we used to have this big 100th anniversary Herald thing that was released in, it must have been the 1970s or 1960s, that showed like the biggest headlines from each of the 100 years preceding it. And so there were the headlines around the moon landing, headlines around JFK's assassination. Like it was a really fascinating thing to sit back and read. And it was international stuff. But it's so well worn. I doubt it exists anymore in a physical form at mum and dad's place. Might be in a library somewhere. That would be kind of cool. See, it's all right. BHN itself not going to be behind a paywall. It is other content referencing BHN that they were talking about, interviews that they were doing, for example, around the dropout from David Seymour and stuff like that. Some of that was getting behind paywalls, and that's not fair. That's not pleasant. Nobody wants to deal with public information like that. And this one here from JC and the Pigeon Cats. Yeah, this is like my 4th or 5th one, I think. This is basically a free lecture on media theory. So I hope people learn stuff. I'm sorry I can't give you a fancy qualification at the end, but I'm hoping people learn a little bit more about reading media. That's my plan anyway. All right, and this one here from NZ Nemesis, not for news, but as a historical record. It's no longer news, it's history recording. Yeah, I love that attitude. I think that's a really good way to look at it when you buy those older ones, or you like those big story ones. I remember September 11, for example, that was massive. All right, let's jump back into this. And remember that poll is still running 1, 2, 3, or 4 on what you do when you find a paywall. Look for it on social media, subscribe or do a free trial. Hope it's on other free news sites, which is clearly leading at the moment, or ignore it because paywalls suck. I'll hide that for a second. We'll go back here. All right. Let's take a look at the New Zealand media landscape, because there is a bit of a paradox that shows up with how paywalls work here. We have, I suspect fish and chip shops got hit by health and safety restrictions. So now clean wrapping, that makes sense, actually. That makes a lot of sense. I haven't looked into it, to be honest. Maybe I should. Anyway, New Zealand media has a bit of a paradox when it comes to paywalls, because we have such vocal right-wing disinformation groups out there that have this whole big, anything that's free is leftist. So people on the platform, for example, or Reality Check Radio or ZB or the Herald, you'll find in their comment section that they will complain a lot about RNZ and TVNZ in particular, because they're state-funded news outlets. No, because you always had like the clear, what you don't want ink on your chips. You always had like the blank newsprint in the middle, and then just newspaper around the outside to keep it warm. This is a great question as well. I guess an alternative view is that if content is paywalled, they aren't under as much influence from advertisers. You're actually really right on this one, Ceso. I'm going to get this right one day. And I'll go into this again shortly as well, because they're not so much influenced by advertisers, but paywalls do change the way that papers and all that media influences things. So yeah, disinformation outlet fans and right-wing mainstream media fans tend to vilify content like stuff from Radio New Zealand and TVNZ as leftist. And it's not. It does tend to have a bit of a right lean to it, because that's just what our media ecosystem is. But it creates this knowledge gap as well. So if you have more money and you're willing to pay for your paywall, then you have more fact-checked information, and that information is contextualized. You might have seen headlines crop up that use one line, for example, that scream about something in particular, but then they miss out a whole bunch of other context because all you're seeing is the headlines. A great example of this is actually the story this week where Willie Jackson turned around and said that, maybe Te Pāti Māori can't win all the Māori seats or something like that. That was part of a press pack that was hounding Willie while he was going for a walk. They asked him the same question 7 times, deliberately trying to frame that as Willie's going to shit on Te Pāti Māori. What they didn't put in any of the media coverage was Willie's comments around top and opportunity, and how they're probably quite happy to actually go and discuss things with opportunity after the election to see what the results are. That didn't make the headlines, but that's also contextualized in the paywall cover stuff about how many times media ask this question, stuff like that. So when you don't have the money to pay for this, what you're basically being sent to are partisan alternatives who lack regulation. And full disclosure here, I'm one of them. I'm highly partisan, and there's very little regulation for the work that I do. I'm not a part of the Media Council. I'm not covered by things like the Broadcasting Standards Authority. Um, the only thing that technically stops me from, spouting right wing bullshit and pulling in all the money is I just can't do that. Like, I physically can't do that. But there is same thing on the right as there is on the left here, partisan alternatives with a lack of regulation. The big, most well-known one, Reality Check Radio and the platform, although they technically should be covered under regulation for broadcasting, because of a couple of different things, different elements that come into it, like the fact that the platform is actually physically broadcast on a radio station, and that streaming live is considered broadcasting. So, yeah. But this is the problem. If you don't have access to that media, but you have access to this free stuff, it's going to lead to a whole bunch of stuff being out of balance, things being out of balance. So let's take a look at some impact here. By putting on a paywall, you automatically reduce the amount of views to that page by about 30%, which is it's significant. 30% fewer people are going to be reading really important news because they can't access it because there's that cost. But there's other little issues that crop up as well. Like you will see a 1.6 to 2.4 reduction in the ability to answer questions correctly from people who have read this content. And this is all research that was done through PNAS, PNAS. Hope nobody mixes that up with the accent. So yeah, it makes people less informed because they just don't have all the information, because it's not available to them, because they have to pay extra for it. But there is also, in areas that have paywalled election information, and this was research that was based out of the United States during the last presidential election, there was a 2% drop in voter turnout in the places where your mainstream media options were paywalled around election content. And that is significant. 2% can make a huge amount of difference. If you're someone like, I think it's Helen White, she won her seat by less than 50 votes at the last election. 2% could have changed things completely differently. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing in that respect. But lower voter turnout is always a bad thing. All right. When it comes to local media coverage, there is a huge shift in the way that media is presented, like the sort of media that actually gets made because of the way that people are paying for it and what they're paying for that goes behind paywall. So they've seen, again, this is that same PNAS research, 5.1% drop in regional news coverage, a 12.8% drop in smaller market coverage. So, for example, you might have something like the Herald that covers the whole country. That's going to have a bit of a drop. But if you look at something like, I grew up with the Te Awamutu Courier, which doesn't exist anymore. It shut down a few years back. Those smaller markets like Dal Waipa or Selwyn area, for example, 12.8% drop in coverage of media for those areas. And you end up with less informed local audiences because of it. There is a 19.1% drop in young people accessing news. So people under the age of, I think it's 29 in this research, being able to access it, because those are the people who tend to be on the lower incomes. They're starting their careers. They haven't got a lot of that spare money, or they might be in that age group where they're often having families. So money gets spent on things like, looking after the kids instead of paying for news. So you end up with an almost 20% drop in young people being able to access content. But what you have also seen is an increase in what we call soft news or lifestyle news. Have you noticed more stories on places like the Herald around the Kardashians or entertainment stuff Sports is a big one because sports is always going to be popular and it's relatively easy to access information about it afterwards. But yeah, it was one of those topics that always was going to have a little bit of an increase, that soft and lifestyle news. It is why places like titles like Viva, Metro, I think there's One Roof also counts under this. They have had a bit of a boom because they tend to do well under these kind of models as well. So yeah, there are some significant impacts. All right. There is also the misinformation substitution. So when voters don't have the option of being able to see content because it's paywalled, they go for options that aren't paywalled. And there is a really serious risk of people accessing disinformation and misinformation. And it might not be deliberate. Some of it is, some of it isn't. And it's just because you don't have that kind of regulation there for them to be able to go, mainstream media, for all its faults, still has to follow certain rules around what they put out there. They can spin something as being biased, but they can make sure that it's technically accurate with the information that they put out. So it is that's where you get your misinformation, and it's free. So why wouldn't you? And if we have a look at the poll results that we're looking at now, let's go show. Hope it's on other free news sites. Can you guarantee that those free news sites are doing what you want? And when we've got such a prevalence of pink slime news at the moment, those AI news sites on places like Facebook that pull from actual journalist work, run it through AI, run the image through AI, and then put it out again, they end up making, I think it's six figures a month for some of the biggest ones that we've got. Is it the New Zealand brand? The owner of that is six figures a month at the moment for what he gets on advertising, because it's free. Free, yeah, and it's unverified, so it becomes really problematic. All right, and then what do we got for the next slide? So down ballot blind spot is also an issue that pops up. Voters who lack information on local candidates in local election races at a regional authority level are driving down turnout. So it is one of the things that we've seen a direct correlation of, where the rise of paywalls and the decrease of voter turnout in elections. Not to the point that Chris Luxon seems to think it happened in Wellington, to be fair. Wellington is a much more political city than other places. They had about 45 to 48% voter turnout. But almost every local authority saw a decrease in voter turnout in 2025. And part of that is because they just don't have the local coverage keeping people informed, or even just reminding people there is an election going on. So it is really important that people are aware of this kind of stuff. All right, I think I'm almost at the end. All right, hyperpartisanship is also a really big one to worry about here. Research shows that there's this direct correlation of closure of papers and an increased use of paywalls to rise hyperpartisan content and polarization. The Herald is the perfect example of this. Shut down a whole bunch of your local papers and drive you to something like the Herald and their network that they've got. And then suddenly that content in the Herald is paywalled for certain things and not paywalled for other things, which creates this hyperpolarization. ZB is a really, really good example of this. You'll often find, because ZB and Herald are the same company, they work in tandem. Herald is your news, ZB is your opinion. Mixing those up so that they kind of cross those lines between opinion and news is a really big part of it. And you paywall stuff on the Herald, so you send people to News Talk for free, where you hear Mike Hosking talking about whatever is the big thing that he wants to talk about with that really right-wing partisan lean. They are specifically manipulating that paywall infrastructure to drive people to the free stuff that pushes their ideology and that hyper-partisanship. So it is a real problem. Clearly, it's a real problem if you've ever seen the News Talk ZB comment section. And then I think this is my final question. Maybe not. This tells me there's more slides. Do you financially support any international or local news or current affairs content creators? That was a bit of a mouthful. So yeah, do you guys pay for any kind of international or local news or current affair content? That would be things like being a Patreon for BHN, or being a paid supporter here on the Paul the Other One stuff, or a Herald membership, or a Stuff membership, or whatever. Matthew, again, with a banger, NZME is a bane to New Zealand media literacy. Yes. God, yes. Yeah. My God, they hurt my brain sometimes. Um, hurt it quite a bit. That's right. I've got some nice things to go through, like what ethical paywalls are. Um, Thank you very much, NZ Nemesis. Appreciate this. Yes, I support the one, the only Paul, the other one. You should too. And again, you can do that if you're watching this on YouTube, and there's a little button down there that says support. You're more than welcome to do that, or just become a subscriber so you get stuff. Stuff is fun. All right, let's take this one off. So let me again. This is doing things on the fly. Do. Let's see. I've got notes literally right here going poll reminder, article reminder. So, poll reminder. What do you do when you hit a paywall on a major political story or election breakdown? Do you go to social media to search for it? Do you subscribe or do a free trial on the platform putting it out there? Do you hope it's on another free news site, or do you ignore it because paywalls suck? 1, 2, 3, 4 in the comment section to vote on this one. And don't be lazy. Where's it? Up there. Up there. And if you're watching this on the Instagram page, this is going to make no sense where I'm pointing. But up there is a QR code that you can scan that will take you to the newsletter looking at the pay equity issues and findings of the People's Panel. Really riveting stuff, I hope. I'm actually really proud of how it came together. So I think it is one of those things that people really need to be aware of. One of the reasons it was done when it was done was to make sure people had forgotten about it by the time the election rolled around. If you want to make sure that people don't forget about it, now is a really good time to remind them, because we've only got something like 70 days. I should know this, 70 days until the election. So please make sure people are informed. Make sure people are enrolled is also a really, really big one. All right, let's jump into the next slide. All right, so local media impact is a really big one. Grassroots candidate vetting and sustaining civic ecosystems is something that we've kind of lost because we don't have that local media stuff anymore. Small local outlets used to provide crucial coverage for local school boards or information on local judges and court decisions, municipal elections, that you're never going to read about, your local school board decisions in the Herald. You're never going to find out what happened in a local by-election in Kaitaia in a stuff headline because, well, unless it was Davina Smolders and she got kicked out, which would be amazing. Other than that, you're probably not going to deal with it. Like, it's just not going to be, what? Okay. And then there's sustaining civic ecosystems. Subscribing to or funding small alternative newsrooms keeps watchdog reporting accessible and ground in local needs. And that's a really important one. I don't know if you guys have ever come across the local democracy reporting stuff that it actually appears in all of our mainstream media. This is pretty much what this does on a local level. It's reporters who work in smaller newsrooms all over the country in various communities, and they'll write something that might be important for their community, but they make it accessible for everybody. And they're up and down the country. There's some really interesting stuff that they've done, and I've helped a little bit with some of the work they did in Northland around the local elections last year and some of the problems that they had, particularly around candidates in, I think it was Kaipara, and the influence of the Centre for Political Research and Democracy Northland. So that kind of information, really important to the people of Northland to know what to vote for, but it can also go out onto other wires, like it ended up, I think, in RNZ, talking about some of the issues up there as well. So it is a really important thing that they do to hold power to account on a local level that you're not going to find in a big place. Right, now, there are things as well called ethical paywalls, and these are basically there to make sure people can pay the bills, that outlets can pay the bills without being quite so, you're only getting this if you pay. It's yeah. All right, so our options here. We've got election open access. So this is outlets that lift paywalls for keyword guides, debates, and election day coverage as a civic public service duty. So specifically election stuff here. So they go, let's make sure that for an election, everything's out there. All the information's out there. Everybody can access everything. Then you have a sliding scale or passes, and this is dynamic pricing, or you might do student discounts, for example, or low-income subsidies, or free access via places like the public library, or passes for those kind of organizations that ensure equitable news access. Which again, really important way of doing things, really good way of making sure that people can access it who might not necessarily be able to because of those paywalls. There's membership and voluntary models as well. Models like The Guardian and ProPublica use voluntary reader contributions, so news remains free for all voters, which is, I think, a really good way of doing things as well. Loving the support coming through for Northland. Also, congratulations. I'm not even a big rugby fan, but I saw Northland won the Ranfurly Shield for the first time in like almost 40 years this week, and just the celebrations are huge. And I think that's the sort of thing we should celebrate. So this is one from Wicked. You mean the ones who ask if you're using for info for work or private? Yes. Yeah. What's that page that does this? I think it starts with a Z. But yeah, there are pages like this where it's work or private. If it's private use, then here have access. If it's work, you have to pay. That is what the sliding scale is for, what it's used for. Equitable access. Did I say equitable? Did I say equal? Equitable is good. Equal is not bad. I feel like I'm in the naughty corner now. I'm sorry. All right. So yeah, membership voluntary is a big one, and then timed pay only access. And to be fair, I use timed pay only access as well for the content that I can. YouTube videos, for example, not this live obviously, but YouTube's videos go up before they go public for paid members. And for me, subscribers on Substack get the newsletter stuff, the weekend deep dive stuff on the Friday morning, and it goes public on the Sunday morning for everyone else to access it. And it's a short-term paywall that releases for free to the wider public after a short time to cover expenses, basically. It's like a perk for supporting that kind of stuff. Oh, yes. Yep, I get it now. Equitable is a dirty word for this government. Again, great sales pitch here, Paul. Well done. In this particular story as well, it points out that it took 45 minutes for them to decide to get rid of pay equity. But in that 45 minutes, the first question that Brooke Van Velden asked her staff was to give her a definition of the difference between equal and equitable pay, because she didn't know for sure. So sad. Depressing stuff. Damn equitable. So yeah, these are some ethical paywalls. They are designed really specifically to still allow access to the content while also being completely able to cover expenses in some way, because costs add up. And then this is my last slide. That makes sense. Scoop. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yes, thank you, Seso. Right. This is stuff that you can do as well around paywall journalism. Call for open access on election coverage. Basically, if you see election coverage on something like Facebook or one of your social media platforms that sends you to a paywalled article, point out that, because it's election coverage, it should be free so that everyone has access to it. Yell in the comments section, write to the editors, make as much noise as you can to point out that it's inequitable to not have free election coverage out there. Ask MPs about media support options, because there's a whole bunch of content and there's a whole bunch of legislation that media would like to see covered, like the digital uses bill, where Google has to pay basically for the use of media coverage that's made in New Zealand by New Zealand journalists. That's something that this coalition was straight up, no, we ain't doing that. But also Labor has been a bit iffy on it. It's one of those things that the industry would really like. So talking to your local MPs about what options are out there, it might be making sure that there's more funding available for places like Radio New Zealand. To their credit, one of the things that the coalition did at the last budget was actually more money for regional news services as well. I can't believe I'm giving them credit for something, but that sort of thing is also a really important thing to ask your local MPs about. Share good public interest journalism and media that you come across. And that's not necessarily just mainstream stuff. That could be the work of people like Nick Rockwell or Gerard Otto. Anybody whose content that you find is really good for the public interest, that goes through detailed stuff, gets information out there. Find podcasts, find writers, find content creators who do a really good job of highlighting issues in a way that's easy for everybody. See, you can tell I've been talking for an hour. My throat's starting to scratch up. And then support the call for local content creators to fill the gaps. So one of the things that you can do there is share content. It's always a big one. Follow content creators that you like, and ask people that you know about the content creators that they follow and that they get their information from. Public Interest NZ is a great example, Matthew. You're right. So yeah, it is one of those things that support the people who are doing the mahi is pretty much what it boils down to, but know that it can't be done for free. Like there's no way that people can live on nothing. That's a really good question, actually, Weka. I don't know what's happened to Mountain Tui these days. I know that they were taking a bit of a break a while ago, and I have not heard much more from them. Yeah, I hope they're okay. It is I have to say, from experience, and I am a middle-aged white guy here, so from experience, it can be really tough, particularly in the left space making content, because you're always going to get right-wing trolls. And right-wing trolls, they can be nasty. Like, they can be really, really awful. And again, I am a middle-aged white guy. I'm not a woman. I'm not Māori, and they get it 10 to 50 times worse than I ever do. So I reckon if you can get out there and support creators in those spaces, it's really, really important, because those are the voices that people need to hear. You know, those are the outlooks and the perspectives that really, really need to be pushed. And you can tell that particularly people in those demographics that I don't fit into are making an impact, because they've got so many trolls so scared that they feel like they have to show everybody how short their understanding is of things. So I do hope they're okay. But yeah, it's also another reason why it's really important to go out and support creators across the spectrum that you like, so that you can show them that they're not working in vain, basically. So yeah, that's the last one of those that I've got. Last one. Right, let's go back up to that image layout. And I'm going to do this one last time because I can. Don't forget, go and read that. Oh, see, there's no point now. I've got that in the way. Go read that. Again, it's free now. There'll be links available, I think, going at about 2 o'clock this afternoon on most of the platforms that I'm on. Just go read this. You really should read this. Go read it. Go share it. Go tell people exactly what happened to pay equity and the faults and flaws with it, because it's so important that we remember that going into this year's election. As I said before, there's a great question that got posed. If you have friends or family who live in a care home who tend to vote right, ask them, why do you support making the people who look after you worse off? I think that is such a powerful message. Also, go and check vote.nz if you have not done so already, to make sure that your enrollment details are up to date. You should start getting little envelopes as well from this week. I got mine the other day with the orange guy on it, the good orange guy, talking about making sure that your details are all up to spec. It's really important that we get people out to do that. And we'll go and check the final results on the poll. Social media, search for it, subscribe, no votes at all. But yeah, 59% of the votes went on to Hope. It's on other free news sites, and 41% of the votes went to ignore it because paywalls suck. Yes, they do. A necessary evil. There are oftentimes better ways of doing it, but it's just how things roll at the moment. All right. See, this is a great way of looking at things. A bit worried about my enrollment from Olby, so I check often. Do it. Absolutely. Yes, as opposed to the bad orange guy. If you know, you know. I had to explain to someone the other day that we have this orange guy for the elections. And like, what do you mean by an orange guy? Like, he's a guy that's orange, and his little dog is orange. And yeah, it's. I think we have become so used to him that it's so hard to explain to anybody else, but he's so quintessentially us. But yeah, go to vote.nz and check your details. People who have been on the roll for a really long time, and I'm talking like years, decades in the same place, have often been moved to the dormant role. So please go and check for other people, like make sure other people are doing that. Like if your parents haven't moved in 20 years, check that they're up to date. So yes. All right. As you can hear, the throat is starting to get a bit raw. It's very, very long time talking. See, my friend Emma dresses up as Orange Guy Arm again. I love that. There was a horror film done a few years ago. I think it must have been 2020, the year that we had the referendum on marijuana legalization and euthanasia. And yeah, there was a great horror film that was done about orange guys coming to get you if you don't vote. And I wish we could do more marketing like that. That was brilliant. Great one here from Snacks Girl. Checked mine this morning. Needed to call them, and they answered at 7:50 a.m. See, love it. Absolutely love it. It is brilliant. And this one here from Kiwi Skirt, just like, share, subscribe. The usual things that I'm supposed to say when I'm talking on YouTube. I'm going to wrap things up here, guys, because the throat is clearly getting a bit scratchety. Thank you very much for everybody who's been watching. I'm going to go and clear the widgets because I've got the Instagram page open here, and it's like the clown with the balloons and the grate. That's all the people can see over on Instagram. So I'm sorry. Everything floats down here. I will sign off here. Don't forget, this week is, what have I got on this week? Thursday, I'll be on BHN. I'm sure I've got other stuff coming up as well. Can't remember. And I'll schedule something for next week. See what else we can learn. Until next time, look after yourselves. Ka kite anō. Don't forget to live long, prosper, be one with the force, and I will catch you guys all soon. Hello there, kia ora podcast listeners. I'm going to keep this one really quick because you've just sat through or listened to like an hour's worth of content, but I do like to add a little perspective onto the end of stuff. It's what makes podcasting so much fun. There's a couple of little things on here that I'm hoping you noticed, mostly around paywalls and the internal conflict that I had, which is I have paywalls on some of my stuff, but I try and do it in an ethical way so that content is available for people to be able to read for free after a couple of days or a day or a couple of hours sometimes before it goes out to the people who support the work that I do financially. It is a really tough one. If I could make content a month in advance, I would, but I can't because I deal with politics and that changes all the time. So I really wanted to make sure that I put something in here about ethical paywalls because there's a few of them out there. There's a few different options different ways that they work. But I'm also a big believer that election stuff in particular should be free. People should absolutely be able to access it to be able to make informed decisions on who they vote for. I think that is really important because there's so much bullshit out there. Let me give you an example, okay? The day that I'm recording this, Sunday the 23rd of August, this morning, the Labour Party released its fiscal plan. It's not a budget, but it's the rules that they want to follow when it comes to how they're going to meet the budgetary requirements of the country. It's something that National actually called for. They wanted to know what Labour was going to do. Labour has done it. It isn't a huge surprise. There's a big amount of CGT element to what they're planning to do. They want to bring back the dual mandate. That means that unemployment is a number that Treasury looks at when they come to how they set inflation rates and stuff like that. They want to bring back some really what's international standards for good governance, like an independent body that looks at what's being proposed and how that's good or bad financially for the government. There's a few things there. Last night, every single Nat MP cut and paste the same bullshit thing about Labour's about to release this, and they promised that they were going to do this stuff in 2017, and by the time they left office in 2023, all of it was out the window. Debt was up and all of their planning had gone out the window, and every single post ignores one really, really clearly obvious fact. Anybody who is over the age of 4 knows we went through a global pandemic during the middle of the last government's term. And that changes how governments work. We know that there was money borrowed for that response. We know the National Party themselves wanted to borrow more and increase the amount of debt for that response. And now they're like, oh, this is bad. This is so bad. Oh, you can't trust them. Every single one of their posts ignored that. Did not mention COVID at all. It just goes, this is how they started, and by the end of it, look at the debt, and clearly they broke all the rules. If that gets covered by media, and to be fair, that's Labour's only made their announcement in the last hour or so. So I don't know at this point that I'm recording this that it will be. But seeing how that gets covered in the media is really important. And if it ends up behind a paywall, well, what does that mean? People are going to go searching for it and then find it online because all of the Nat MPs have this information out there that is clearly misleading. And that's a problem with paywall journalism. So I thought, great example of it, and I'm gutted I couldn't do this earlier. I'm also really glitchy in the recording. I don't know why. Then I will check in a moment. Also, did you like the new ident? I've put an ident on the podcast now. Somebody told me I had to do it because otherwise people don't know what they're listening to. We'll see. All right, until next time, look after yourselves. Ka kite anō. Please go and check your voters' registrations up to date, and I will talk to you all later.